Okay, so I will call to order this regular meeting of the Kent Arpa Assessment Committee on Wednesday, April 20th, and it is 4:34 p.m. The second item on the agenda is to amend if necessary and then accept the agenda. Does anyone have any amendments to make to the agenda?
Well, I would like to put on there or discuss something about the survey, posting or, making the results available, because it's been a while now since it closed, and, people are probably wondering, what the results were.
Okay, so let's add before item 6, let's add 6 new business, and A will be making survey results publicly accessible. Okay. Any others? Okay, and if there are none, then I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda.
Moved.
Thanks, Barbara. And a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Joe. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. If any are opposed. And given that there are none, that motion carries.
For the minutes, Ruth is not there, correct?
Ruth is not here.
And no members of the public?
There are no members of the public here at the
Okay.
moment. Okay, the next item on the agenda is to amend if necessary and then approve the minutes of our April 13th regular meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? And would anyone like any amendments? Okay, and if none, then I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Thanks, Barbara, and a second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Joe. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
I'm going to oppose. And that nay vote can be because I don't think they accurately reflect the discussion that we had last week. But the motion carries.
In what way?
I feel that we were much closer to agreement. Maybe we voted on 3 of the category allocations. And I also feel that there were opinions reflected in the minutes, which are fine as long as all opinions are reflected in the minutes, if we are going to reflect opinions in the minutes. And so because of that, I will vote nay. However, the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is public comment, and there are no members of the public here. If it's okay, I think we should do 5E first, which is our presentation to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, only because I have, as you saw, made outreach to the Board of Selectmen to see if we can have a special meeting. I asked them actually if they would make their special meeting in accordance with our schedule. So that it could be a Wednesday at 4:30, like we are accustomed to meeting. And Jean is open to that, but asked, do we want May 4th or May 11th? And I would love for us to discuss whether we think we can be ready for either of those dates and whether there's a preference.
I have a preference for May 11th because it'll be after the budget hearing.
Okay with either, but if you prefer that.
Patricia, do you have a preference?
I think the 11th is the safer bet.
Okay, good. So we will ask for the 11th and get that calendared. Great.
Oh, I just thought of something. Craig Bibbs' email, he had a recommendation to read his email notes into the minutes.
Yes, I was gonna read it in when we began to discuss item 5C, which is our discussion about our recommendations. Is that okay with you?
Where is that now?
5C, like when we start to
Okay,
deliberate
all right,
again, okay?
Sorry, I just want to check one more thing for the minutes. The motion to approve the agenda with Joe's addition was made by Barbara and seconded by Joe.
Yes,
And the same with the minutes, Barbara and Joe.
yes.
Okay.
Okay, so moving in 5A, are there any updates on one-on-one interviews? No,
We agree on May 11th?
yes.
Okay.
And then 5B, any updates on tracking requests for funding?
No, I did add the Marvelwood berries to the blueberries to the sheet, but other than that, I haven't received anything else now.
Okay, I think that last week we said there were two. You thought there might have been
I could
two.
only find one,
Okay,
so I don't know what the second one would have been.
okay. Okay, and so let's move into 5C, and why don't I read Craig's comments into the minutes now. And I hope that you've all had the opportunity to review what he sent yesterday. So for the record, Craig writes, unfortunately, I will again be traveling on Wednesday, April 20th, but I will be able to attend our committee meeting on April 27th and throughout May. I viewed the April 13th Zoom recording and will do the same for tomorrow's meeting. I have attached my revised allocations in a spreadsheet and summarized it below. There is a link to our Google Drive. Please read this into the minutes as required by state transparency rules. Here are Craig's allocations. Assist residents, $40,000 or 5% of the total. Assist businesses, $40,000, 5% of the total. Nonprofits, $83,000, 10% of the total. Kent Volunteer Fire Department, $166,000, 20% of the total. Infrastructure, $300,000, 37% of the total. Municipal, $192,855, 23% of the totals. Assist residents, the almost $2 trillion of federal assistance for individuals who lost income due to COVID was so large that median household net worth and household savings both rose during the pandemic, even with the spring/summer 2020 spike in unemployment. This included an additional $2,400 per month in unemployment benefits, the waiver of some taxes on these benefits, a direct cash payment of $1,200 per person plus $500 per child, waiver of early withdrawal penalties from retirement accounts, mortgage and rent forbearance, etc. Overall, individuals have already received an extraordinary amount of assistance from the federal government. Our survey asked residents if they suffered an income or job loss, but did not ask about offsetting benefits from the CARES Act and other programs. Our committee has essentially no information on the number of residents who are suffering hardship. That said, there must be some individuals whose need exceeds the benefits they have already received. Thus, my $40,000 allocation to assist residents. Per our survey results, Kent residents want to help individuals in need, the second most popular response. Given the town of Kent's lack of experience in providing direct relief to individuals, I believe that nonprofits are a better option for finding and evaluating Kent residents still in need. Several survey comments noted the importance of reserving funds for low-income individuals who are truly in need. Assist businesses. COVID had a terrible impact on some businesses, such as those in the hospitality business, while it proved to be a surprising boon to others. such construction. Here again, the federal government has already provided extraordinary assistance to businesses, including $500 billion in government loans and $851 billion in loans and grants to small businesses, primarily via the Paycheck Protection Program. Patricia Orr's interview with a nail salon owner made it clear that at least some small business owners were bypassed by these programs because they were either newly opened or did not have a solid bank relationship. Small businesses that can demonstrate losses not already offset by other government assistance should be able to apply for Kent's ARPA funds, and thus my $40,000 allocation for small business assistance. Again, our committee has no data on the number of Kent businesses that suffered hardship nor on the amount of their need, and the town of Kent has no demonstrated skill at evaluating the financial condition of businesses. Direct assistance to small businesses should be contingent on demonstrating need and disclosure of benefits already received. Our survey indicated that Kent residents want to use ARPA funds to assist small businesses in need. Nonprofits. The committee's nonprofit focus groups and one-on-one meetings made it evident that there are residents suffering from mental health and other issues stemming from COVID, and that the pandemic had a negative impact on their fundraising efforts. Thus, I allocated $83,000 or 10% of the funds to nonprofits to both assist their ongoing efforts and help them get caught up. Our needs assessment survey demonstrated that helping nonprofits was important to town residents. Kent Volunteer Fire Department. The single most important use of ARPA funds per the respondents to our survey. KVFD is clearly COVID relevant, and it also had to curtail some fundraising efforts. Fully funding their $166,000 request for ARPA funds is consistent with the needs recognized by our community. Funds allocated to the fire department benefit all Kent residents. Infrastructure. Using ARPA funds to improve Kent's infrastructure also benefits all residents. Infrastructure is a specifically eligible use of ARPA funds, and there is no requirement that infrastructure spending be COVID related. The town of Kent has significant infrastructure needs for building improvements, recreation facilities, sewage, drainage, etc., which exceed the total amount of funds available. This being the largest demonstrated need and most equitable use of the funds, I allocated $300,000 to infrastructure. Survey respondents were supportive of spending to improve town infrastructure. Improve recreational facilities will clearly help the town cope with future pandemics. Improving recreation was also a common theme in survey comments. Our survey of other towns' uses of ARPA funds showed that a significant and often the largest percentage was allocated to infrastructure projects. Municipal. This broad category is also perfectly equitable in that it benefits all residents. KCS did a good job of managing through the pandemic, but the time away from in-person classes resulted in many children lagging academically and socially. Multiple sources told the committee of students struggling to readjust socially. Yeah, okay, sorry, that word looked funny, including a spike in disruptive behavior. Improved after-school programs both at KCS and the Recreation Department would address these needs. Our survey and focus groups also highlighted the difficult isolation of many seniors. Using ARPA funds for community programs that were targeted at or simply inclusive of seniors would help address this important need. For these reasons, I allocated the remainder of the ARPA funds, $192,855, to municipal purposes. As with infrastructure, a large percentage of ARPA funds was allocated to municipal uses by surrounding towns. After the discussions at the last two meetings, I think it is important to re-emphasize that the ARPA Assessment Committee's recommendations be based first and foremost on the input that we have received from the community, and that those recommendations should be consistent with the data/input that we've collected. As shown in my spreadsheet, there is not a huge difference in the mean and median allocations. Thus, I am indifferent to using either. I agree with Glenn that we should attempt to close the wide disparity in allocations to infrastructure and individuals. And the rest is a spreadsheet, which I don't think I can read into the record. So before we get into it, I want to say two things. And the first is that as the chair of this committee, I feel that my role is two things. number one, as a committee member to provide input, and number two, as a person to help us to deliberate and reach conclusions. And so sometimes what that means is that I am saying things that seem to be conclusive of what our discussion is, and sometimes I am saying things from my individual opinion. But I will never be at a place where I insist on my own opinion being the opinion that is what's put for a consensus vote. And so I wanted to preface by saying that, and also by asking you, if you ever feel that way, to please call me out about it. That being said, I do believe that we had some agreement, and therefore I'm going to put as a motion on the table that we allocate 160,000 to individuals, 150,000 to businesses, and 190,000 to nonprofits, because I believe that we got to that place in our last meeting, and that what we were going to try and do with this meeting is discuss individual requests that fall into the KVFD, infrastructure, and municipal categories.
Could I just interrupt for a minute? Because according to the minutes from the last meeting, there was, it says in the minutes that there wasn't an agreement on the amounts.
Yes, that's true. I remembered it differently, so I'm putting a motion on the table. Anyone is free to second that motion, or if we don't feel we had that agreement, I'll withdraw the motion.
Well, are we going through them item by item or category by category?
I'll second the motion so that we can have this discussion, because we should really be having the discussion about the motion. So if you want to answer.
Great, so yeah, so there's a motion on the table based on our discussion last week, which seemed to me to come to some agreement on the numbers that I've just put into play, which is 160 for individuals, 150 for small businesses, and 190 for nonprofits.
Okay, so that first amount, 160, how do you justify? How do you arrive at that figure? Because you just read Craig's comments, notes, and there's no justification as to hurt or a hardship that was demonstrated. How do you justify that?
I suggested those numbers at the last meeting, and actually I'll preface my statement by saying that I remember what Connie remembers, that we had a very robust discussion at the very end of the meeting about these three categories and assigned these values to these categories. Those values are rounded up numbers based on the averages that we all assigned to those categories. So that's
Okay,
how
well,
that number was arrived
All right,
at.
so you had a majority of opinion that said that was the amount that you should use.
That was
What is the backup? What is the evidence?
It's the average of what we all
Okay, so there's no
allocated.
evidence then, is what you're saying.
Well, the evidence is what we each allocated. We each allocated an amount, and then I took those amounts and I made an average out of those amounts. And that's where I came up with the 145, 331.
Yeah,
And in discussion, we decided to round up the numbers. So we rounded them up to 160,
that.
150, and
I get
190.
that. It's an average. I get that. But how did you get that? How do you justify getting that amount? Anybody?
I
How do
just
you
did.
justify?
Joe, you know what it is? It's an average. It's a way of us agreeing, because our committee has to come to agreement around these things. And so you've got people who think it should be much lower, and you've got people who think it should be much higher, and you've got people who are in the middle. And when you take all of them into account and have a discussion, as we did, about, especially about the fact that we're not even sure that we would get $160,000 worth of claims, but we wanted to make sure that we took care of people who needed it first. That is how we got to that discussion last
Okay,
week.
So I get that. I totally get that. We took an average of that. So for that amount, if you put in a low amount of allotment for that, and somebody puts in a super high amount for that, there has to be some kind of reasoning why that person chose that high figure.
I think we got to both of those things. So Craig's, you've heard right now, right? That is
Right.
what he justifies his number of 40,000.
Right?
I was the person who put in 400,000, which I stand by. And that is based on the survey responses and based on the reporting of just a few respondents that they had $400,000 worth of need. That is what the surveys actually said. We are skeptical about whether or not we would have $400,000 worth
I'm
of
very
claims.
skeptical of
I
that.
understand that. We've had this discussion,
I
but
know we
I
have.
still believe in the 400, so I'm leaving my number there.
Well, I mean, I ethically, I look at it as being, if it can't be justified, I mean, it's not my money, it's not your money, it's federal money, it's a taxpayer's money. So if it's going to something that can't be justified, that to me, that's a misappropriation of funding.
I just told you, I didn't make it up. I added up the claims that were in our surveys and came up with that much need. And I mean, that's how I did my
Well,
calculations.
there's no backup for that. For if you go back to the annual report of the town, there was only something like 36 families that had assistance from the food bank. So, I mean, where are all these mysterious people that had hardships?
I believe we discussed this last week to some degree. And what the consensus seemed to be, at least it was my perception that the consensus seemed to be, was that there would be an application process for these first three groups. There would be some criteria that they would have to provide to qualify. There would be a cap on the amount of grants. And if in fact, there weren't people that came forward and claimed or qualified for the total value that were allotted to these categories, then the balance of those categories would automatically roll into the other three categories. That's my recollection of the discussion last week.
I don't remember it being in that depth of that discussion. I mean, you know.
Patricia, do you? What was your recollection of our discussion about this last week?
About the 160?
About all three of the categories and the valuation?
Yes, we did have a discussion of those numbers. I remember that. And I remember it was based on an averaging. And I also recall you saying that whatever money wasn't applied for in the individual category or in any category, actually, that money would roll into one of the other categories automatically. Yes. I remember those discussions.
Yeah, I didn't, you know, I don't remember that. I didn't hear that, whatever. I mean, so if there is an amount left over for one of these allocations, what happens to that? It goes into another?
We go into one of the three that don't have to be applied for. So
See, I totally missed that at the last meeting.
Do you have a recollection?
I recall talking about that, yes.
I'd have to go back and listen to the Zoom meeting again, because like I said, I really did not.
and or if, let's say, only 5 businesses applied for the money, and so there was still a large chunk of that money left over, but more people applied for the individual grants than we had allocated money to, then the money from the unused or unallocated money in the business line would automatically go to satisfy the people in the individual line. And then if those were all satisfied and there was still funding left over, eventually it would roll all the way back to the direct allocations, either the fire department, infrastructure, or municipal. That was my understanding of
That
the
was
conversation.
my understanding as well.
Okay,
Okay.
because I see, I didn't get that at all, because when I went ahead and I did my recommendations, for some of those amounts that were discussed at the last meeting, I had trouble just coming up with how, in this category, if this amount was settled on, how could I justify and, you know, that for that whole amount. And I really had a struggle with a lot of the categories there. So had I known what you're saying now, that would have made a big difference into, you know, how I would have distributed some things.
What difference would it have made?
Well,
Would you
it
been
would have made
closer to the 160? Or
for
farther?
the individual.
Yeah, if you knew that any unapplied for aid would trickle down to municipal and infrastructure if not applied for, would that have made a difference to you in terms of how you felt about these numbers that were averages?
Well, actually, I don't know if you had gotten it or not, but I had sent out my recommendations. I sent it out to everybody on the committee. I don't know if they were gotten or not.
Yeah.
But they were.
I got
Okay, so Connie, on there for the, in fact, I have it here. I took each category and then individual resident, and I used that 160 amount. And I'm totally in agreement with for the IGA premium pay for the IGA workers. I mean, I've included that, and I have right from the get-go. Anyhow, for the rest of the amount, I you know, came up with an idea of the Kent Arpa grant being given for $70,000 to be divided up into $40 bill payments for individuals due to hardship caused by the pandemic. Again, who knows where they are, but anyhow, if there is someone that appears, then that money would be there for that purpose. And the 30,000 going to the Kent Food Bank. And then I had put also on here for, well, for the food bank for inventory technology supplies. And to have that whole grant administered by the social service department here in Kent, because they would be the ones dealing with these kind of things. And also, and then for the remaining amount, I thought of, you know, as I listed here, a vehicle, a SUV van for seniors for usage of for their medical appointments, since there isn't any medical facilities left here in town, and or for recreational service for trips. But and my point here is that I kind of had to pick my brain to kind of fill up that amount.
I feel like we are far away from getting to a place where we can make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and that is disappointing because I know that a month ago, everyone was very hot on being able to move some of this money to individuals. And I'm not really sure what to do, because the
Well, I mean,
vision that you have for
if you
what
would-
the
if-
160 is different from the vision that we were proceeding on. And so I think that, I mean, I think the idea of funding a van, which hasn't been requested, is not a bad thought, but none of us thought of that as being in the pot of individual aid. And so I feel like we can't even make the most simple allocations until we figure out what belongs in what pot. You know, that to me is municipal.
Okay, well, we do have a motion on the table. And so we're discussing that motion, and Ruth wasn't here when the motion was made.
And I apologize, I had an
That's
emergency
okay.
meeting in Torrington.
So can we just restate
Yes.
the motion for Ruth, and
Please.
then she can weigh in?
The motion on the table is that we allocate 160,000 to individuals, 150 to businesses, and 190 to nonprofits, with those three classifications being subject to an application process, which we haven't conclusively determined, but we have at least begun to talk about in a way that I think there was some agreement about, but no final on the application processes yet. But those three categories would be subject to an application process. The other relevant factor would be that if any of those pots were not fully used by the numbers of applications received, that money would trickle down for another use.
And that totals, my math is, sorry.
I have two questions about the motion.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Patricia.
One is adding in that nonprofits is all application and not a hybrid approach, as Barbara suggested, makes it less attractive, the whole motion. So if that came out, it would be, if that part that they're all three decided amounts and all three totally application, that maybe is two different motions. And the second question.
Let's just clarify the hybrid approach, because you may not know what that means. And because I think that there isn't a difference between applications and hybrid. A hybrid approach, the way that came about during our discussion was that we felt that it was that in some ways we had heard from so many nonprofits that we knew we would definitely want to give money to. And so the hybrid approach came up as a way of saying that we were presumptively going to take applications from and presume that we were funding the nonprofits who had already applied to us and signified amounts up to a certain amount of dollars.
And then whatever balance was left, we would get applications from.
Right, and the reason it came out is that we thought that there were probably a significant number of nonprofits who might make application that hadn't made any outreach to us because we had not proactively asked them to, because there was no application.
We would basically take the submission that we've already received from that nonprofit and just call it an application at this point and be part of that category of the 150.
Right,
So
so
it's the hybrid approach.
thank you for bringing that up, Patricia, because I think that we all were considering the application by nonprofits who had already reached out to us as being presumptively included.
And the second question I had was, Barbara, were you using the current numbers that everyone suggested when you came up with those averages? And Glenn's, I remember Glenn averaging those in the beginning, and somehow they have been attributed to him as his recommendations. So are those Glenn's actual recommendations or his averaging of the first set of recommendations? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so let me just answer the first part. I came up with my averages based on the information that was in the sheet last week when we started our meeting. And that did include numbers from Glenn, that include numbers from Craig and Joe, myself, you and Connie and Ruth. Everybody's numbers were in there. So that's where I came up with those averages. Now you can speak to you.
So yeah, I mean, but early in this process, those were the numbers I put down, and I did say averages for them, because I did see very quickly how members of this committee looked at these categories very differently. I mean, we clearly have a big divide between what residents should get and what infrastructure should get, for example. So how do we bridge that divide? Is what we're dealing with right now. So right now there's a motion on the table. We have the first three categories that we have applications for. So the last three categories we do not.
No, we are, so, number one, I recall you adjusting your numbers. So I remember you actually putting numbers into the chart. But I mean, I
Well,
could be
there's
wrong,
numbers here that he had
Yeah.
put in originally.
but they
Yeah.
weren't, I think you adjusted your numbers after your original.
Well, I don't know, because I've
Yeah.
got.
No, I think they were,
200, 200.
I think what your chart is.
Oh, the
was
adjusted numbers?
Glenn
Oh.
adjusted, he
Possibly.
came, like, because you made your first ones kind of, in a rush at a meeting,
Yes.
based on what you were seeing as kind of the middle ground, but then I
Yes.
think you went back to it, and I don't want to put the idea in your head, so
Um,
maybe I'm
If,
wrong.
if 246, 855, 200, 207 are numbers that you think are appropriate, that's right. I just wasn't sure that those were really your numbers.
They were that one meeting. Yes. Now, did I revise them at some point? I'm trying to look through my notes here. I can't find that. But should I revise them at this point? I mean,
That's
what?
only a question you can answer.
That's only a question I
We
can
can
answer.
answer that for you.
The 456 question
Yes.
was that we did not get to discussing that
We didn't
last
We
week.
didn't get to that.
We decided that they were unlike the first three categories because they were known quantities.
Yes.
We knew what the projects were that could be funded.
And also, they're single entities, like, we're not gonna get another fire department stepping forward and saying, well,
Yes.
we want ARPA funding, or another municipality, or another sewer, or another park and rec. So those categories, there's not gonna be more than them coming forward, whereas individuals, businesses, and nonprofits, there could be.
So my question right now for this motion is if, let's say, we're giving $160,000 to residents, but let's say
We're allocating.
we're
that
allocating,
amount.
but
But
let's
that
say
doesn't necessarily mean that amount will be used.
so if that amount isn't used, so if
Mhm.
60,000 of that, for example, isn't, that would trickle down to either business or nonprofit, but not below that line.
It absolutely would go below that line. It depends on what kind of
It could go,
response we get
so
from the
that-
first three categories.
okay, so that could go to Kent Volunteer Fire Department or infrastructure.
Right.
Okay, so that money
That
can go
answers a
everywhere.
lot, because my question, I'm
That-
sorry, I didn't mean to.
That answers a lot for me.
Because when I started thinking about all this, and you want firm numbers, it's very hard, because we don't have applications, we don't know who's going to apply.
That's right.
And I'm very uncomfortable with set numbers, but if we can be flexible, then I'm okay. Because quite frankly, I don't see 160,000 for individuals coming. I don't think it's gonna happen, but,
I
or
agree
whatever
with
it
you.
is.
As long as these numbers are a guide, these are
And
not set
that's
in stone,
stone,
I mean, these numbers may change however many people apply in the first three.
Okay.
So if we have, which we do, I think we have some good data from the survey, from the one-on-one, from the focus groups. I think we can make, a good judgment on all six categories, but we're not beholden to this, depending on who asks.
Well, we have to, I mean, we're not beholden to anything, because
Yeah.
we are not the ones who are ultimately going to make these allocations.
Yeah.
But what we can say is, this is what we think
What do you think?
it should be. And if we don't use all of the money in the first three categories, the same way as we are going to say, we think the volunteer fire department should receive this, that they've specifically asked us for. We think that our municipal government should receive this for things they specifically asked us for. We could say, if money is unused from those first three categories, that this is what it would go to next. So these are recommendations that we would be making that are specific to what happens to the overage.
Do we put a timeline on that?
Yes,
Yeah, we
we
are.
thought
if
like a
somebody-
month.
I mean,
We thought a month.
I
make
mean,
it
if
short, but
if
not too
after
short.
a certain time,
Yes.
we don't have that, then we start putting
I
it,
would say yes, because otherwise it's just
it's
gonna
gonna
drag
be,
on.
right, and we've got to,
So the discussion we had last week was it would be a month. For all three of the categories, the first three categories would be simultaneously at the same time. A month to get the information out there, get the SIMP application out there, have people start submitting. And then after that month, that's closed and we go from there.
I mean, I'm not crazy about some of those numbers, but I would go along with them.
And just to point out that right now the motion on the table is $500,000 for the first three categories. You just read Craig's email here, and he has for the last three categories, Kent Volunteer Fire Department, infrastructure, and municipal, he's got 658,000. So within our committee, we have a very large gap of where these funds should be.
Absolutely,
And-
but I mean, and one thing too, that has to be more, to bear in mind is that there's a limited amount of money that's been granted. And some of these things, to my way of thinking, are higher priority than other things. So I think in our recommendations that also has to be noted too. In other words, say, okay, the fire department requested a large amount. Whether or not that is all needed, they know. So anyway, that takes away money from, say, Marvelwood's blueberry patch request. So, to weigh all these things, it requires judgment. I know that we're not finally making the ultimate decision, but it does require judgment.
So Joe, your numbers, with the exception of the residents, align pretty closely with Craig's.
They do, yes.
So how do you feel right now about these numbers in this motion?
Well, I'm sticking with my numbers. As I sent out, things that I would put in there for, say, and I put tentative amount, and I put down specific things that I would like to see covered under that tentative amount. But also too, I'm also bearing in mind too, that some of these things that I listed, it's not feasible that it's going to happen because of, say an exorbitant amount, which is gone in another category. That's why my feeling is that amount for the individual resident too high, because I'm not convinced that there is a need for that, because there is the avenue that if there truly is a hardship, there's a social service department here in town that would be of assistance.
Joe, can you go over your numbers again? Just the basic.
Which numbers for the?
How much from each? Oh, okay,
He's got the same numbers, but he's allocating every dollar.
right, which
That's it. So
I think it's kind of hard to vote for the amount for three categories with no understanding or no sort of agreement about the other three, because if we motion and second and take a vote and approve those three, and then we come down to municipal and find out that, well, most of us agree that we need to spend, I think last week, in that discussion of averages, you allotted $100,000 each to municipal and infrastructure. And That seems very short to me. So what I'm saying is it's hard to look at half of it without having a feeling for what you want to do with the other half, because it is a limited amount of money, as Joe says. So we can commit $500,000 to the first three and then not have enough for some to make recommendations for disbursements for municipal that are really important. So that's the difficult part of agreeing on the first three to me.
Was there a reason for just doing the first three?
Yes, we had an almost 2-hour discussion to get to the point where there was this almost agreement. And I regret not calling a vote last week, because I feel that we are here for another 2 hours today, or until Barbara has to break. And I don't know that we're gonna meet our May 11th deadline.
Okay,
So we need to, maybe we can call the vote.
I think we've all given our opinion, we've all discussed. So I think you're right. Call for a vote. If it gets voted down, then I think the next thing that needs to happen is one of us needs to make another motion to allocate funding amounts and be very specific and clear as to which ones you're funding, and somebody can second it and we can have more discussion about that. We're never, ever going to come to an agreement when we're just discussing the same information over and over again. So
one difference that I might suggest from that is that if the motion doesn't carry, that we might turn to what Patricia has suggested to discuss the actual fire department infrastructure and municipal projects that we feel are of highest priority. However, I do want to caution that I feel there's a danger that at that point we will not agree, and that we won't get to it. We'll use all the money up, and we'll realize that we've agreed on something that doesn't allow for the first three categories. So I think it just as easily could happen that way as what Patricia has said, where, you know, we use 500 for the allocation for the first three and can't fund everything in the last three. The only reason I feel somewhat more comfortable with doing that is that the first three are needs-based unknown, and that it seems to us highly possible that there may be an overage. And to me, it's like when you throw a party, you know, you order enough food, because the worst thing would be to run out, right? The worst thing I think would be to not be able to serve the needs of our community members. But that is my opinion again. So I feel like, why not do something that could possibly be overfunding, just to make sure that we have enough to satisfy that need.
I don't have anything more to discuss. I'm ready to vote.
Yeah, I'll feel more comfortable actually allocating numbers if we're talking about all 6 categories.
All right, well, let's see. Let's call the vote. Motion on the table is 160, 150, 190, with the structure that we've described for those first three categories. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
All right, we're back to the drawing board.
Well, actually, I want to make, I mean, if I can, I'd like to make another motion
Go ahead.
that category 1, because there seems to be a lot of a wide range for that one category there, that we have a discussion, make a motion that we have a discussion for the allocated amount, and just isolate that one area, because the other 2 areas, I'm comfortable with what we have down on paper, you know.
So-
and I would vote, you know, vote in favor of
Please
that.
put a motion on the table.
Okay, well, I'd like to put a motion that we explore the allocating a different amount than what we have there for the resident and individual group.
Can you make a motion for a specific number to allocate for individuals?
I can make a motion for different than 160. I mean, it has to be a specific motion, a motion.
Well, if you're making a motion that we discuss another number, I think we should just have a
Okay,
discussion.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to give the figure for residents and individual, say 70,000.
70.
Is there a second for 70? Okay, so there is no second for that motion, Joe, and I suggest that we continue discussing, as you said, but I don't know whether it's better to discuss just doing these categories one by one or to move to some of the others, and I would throw it
Well,
out there. for-
actually, there's people that are uncomfortable with that 160 figure. So maybe 70 is too low. Somewhere in between.
Well, I think some of us would like to just see all six before we voting on all six, rather than one by one, or three, or however.
Well, there's agreement with some categories, like I'd say businesses and nonprofits, you know, and to some degree, the fire department, but the two that are widest apart seem to be infrastructure and resident, individual.
Well, that's why I think maybe we should have all six on the table.
We already have, and there was disagreement, you know.
No, a motion is different than just a discussion. You want to make a motion? Come on, Ruthie. You can do it. Here's the list.
Well, just to get this out. Okay, well. I'm gonna go with, I move that we allocate $100,000 for individuals, $100,000 for businesses, 200,000 for nonprofits. At least another 4. So 150 for municipal, 150 for infrastructure, and 75 for fire.
Can you go through them again, please? I didn't-
Yeah, 100
For individuals. Okay.
Yeah, 100 for business,
200 for nonprofits,
Mhm.
75 for the fire department,
Well,
150 for infrastructure, and 150 for municipal, and I will second that motion. No real discussion about that.
yeah, my thoughts, well, again, if we're still on this flexible, where we can move things around, which gives us a lot of leeway, I like. I'm just not sure about how many individuals are going to apply. I feel strongly about Davis's IGA. I really, on the business side of it, I think that's an important one. The others, not so much. Nonprofits, I think are important. I think we can help some of those out. Municipal, I'm looking at, I'm not giving numbers, but senior center upgrade, I think is important, as is the after-school program. And the infrastructure, I think we heard about recreational improvements at either the park, Emory, or the pavilion, or whatever. I think the new Park and Rec guy has talked about those strong needs. And we heard, you know, the town garage needs some help. So that's where I'm coming from.
Those are, you're putting all of those in municipal, or you were putting those? in
Infrastructure for the recreational improvements. That, you know, at Emory and those things, and town garage, and, you know, I'm not sure that the exact numbers on this, but
Did you?
And I want to put it out there that nobody has proposed upgrading the senior center. So, and I don't mean
I
that
thought I
to,
saw that
no, that was an idea that originated within this room by the committee, by
Okay,
people
well,
I think
I
who would
strongly feel-
really love that to happen.
I
But there
strongly- I
is
feel
no
strongly.
guarantee that that will happen.
No,
because,
well, there's
you
no
know,
guarantee any of this is
Yeah.
gonna happen.
Actually, what do you mean by upgrading? I'm familiar with the center. I mean, I've been in there and I've, there's the Masons have meetings there. And I'm familiar with, but what exactly would you suggest to be upgraded there?
It needs some sprucing.
It needs painting, it needs a large screen TV, it needs Wi-Fi, it needs programming mostly. A series of activities for, that's what's required. With Emery Park, it may be interesting to note that that park has been shut down by the State Department of Health for a variety of reasons. The concrete walls of the pool are collapsing. There are weird things growing and weird objects at the bottom of the pool. The deck is corroding and unstable. So they have shut it down and they won't reopen it until a complete engineering report is done. So I don't think it behooves us to put money in for Emery Park because I think that is a big can of worms that's gonna, if it ever comes to life again, will require a huge investment, much more than we can give from the ARPA funds.
That's a start. At least we show some interest. I feel that this town, we have a huge aging population that therefore the senior center, and kids who need recreation. So, I mean, that's where I'm coming from.
what do you think would happen if we made a specific recommendation for a gift to upgrade the senior center? Like unsolicited? Do you think that we would be able to, like, do you think that, I mean,
Everything has to be solicited.
I
Well,
would think
so
it
I'm
would be
just-
utilized, I do,
Okay.
because it's been
Okay,
quite the
good.
discussion
It's
at
a
the
big,
selectmen's.
huge discussion.
right, and I don't mean to, I
level.
really,
Yeah,
I
I think
am
it would
all
be used.
for it. I just wanted to know opinions for
But
whether or
not
not we
everything
could.
needs to be.
I think
We're charged with coming up with
I
ideas
agree,
ourselves.
but I
so.
just wanted to, like, if we made up a use that had not been suggested to us, whether or not that would be.
I don't see that as a
Okay,
problem
that's
at
good.
all. I mean.
So without figuring out specifically what things would be funded, we
I-
vote on these numbers.
Patricia,
Yeah. 100, 100, 200, 150, 150, 75.
Yep. I could vote on them. I'm comfortable with the categories and the dollar amounts.
Can I say just one thing about these numbers? They're very, very close to the median of what we were doing earlier, those numbers right there. Two of these categories are exactly the same as what I said, the nonprofits and the Kent Fire Department. From my numbers, it shifts numbers from individuals and businesses to municipal and infrastructure.
What are you saying?
So
What are you saying here?
But what, I mean, it's.
You knew, is that what you're saying? I knew all along.
But what's important here is that, again, these are not written in stone. I mean, if we make a vote right here and we're recommending allocating $100,000 to individuals, and that's higher, we may do that if there's, right? I mean, more selectmen may.
Well, I would
Disperse
agree. I
those
think the
funds.
recommendation comes with the caveat that if there's funding in a category that isn't utilized, that it rolls into a category that is requiring that.
Well, here's another thing too, that has to be considered too, is that with the ARPA funding, it includes money for storm drainage issues, water issues. I mean, it's money for that. And who knows when that's gonna happen again. That has to be considered.
So why don't we, I mean, if it works, we could move to discussing, once we've got our numbers, we can move to discussing what projects in each of those 4, 5, 6 categories we would like those allocations to go towards.
So should we take a vote on Ruth's motion first?
Yeah,
Well, I don't know if we can get to that point today about that, because here's why.
I really highly think if we can vote on it, that we should, because otherwise we're gonna be doing this again next week.
Well, here's what okay, I came up with figures for the tentative amount. Last week, we agreed on average amounts. So anyhow, for example, infrastructure, I mean, a lot of the projects that could be possible would be pretty high. And to have a figure of, what was it you said, Ruth, 150?
I'm not talking about funding. I don't see us funding full projects with any of this. It may be a start and it may help, but none of this, I mean, $150,000 today is nothing.
Well, let me,
So-
maybe I shouldn't use project. We'll say upgrades. Upgrade to like facility, the sewer facility, okay? That was like $57,000. Okay, so that's half of the amount there. You said 100,000, right? Or-
150.
Okay, well, 57,000 for the sewer upgrade for their facility there. And, for the park and rec, they're gonna have to have some kind of a study of some sort to figure out what their drainage problem over there. And that's,
If we can vote on the numbers, we can get into the detail of all of
I
that.
think that's what we have to do, is we have to have the vote. Because if it passes, it passes, and if it doesn't, we're back to drawing board again. But let's see if we can vote on this motion. And we are time limited tonight, so the motion on the table is 100 individuals, 100 businesses, 200 nonprofits, 150,000 for infrastructure, 150,000 for municipal, 75,000 for the Kent Volunteer Fire Department, with some understanding of some flexibility within the, I think, first 3 categories dependent on need, right? Because we are not talking about if we know we can fill 150, 150, and 75. All right, are we good?
before I have to vote on this, let me make sure I'm understanding what I'm voting on first. So voting on these numbers, you're consenting to have these numbers as the amount that would be used for the allocations.
For the classes, yes.
So in other words, you agree with those numbers.
If you vote yes, and if you vote no, then you're disagreeing with the numbers, and you can vote either way.
So what if you agree with some and not all of them? You have to vote no then, right?
You would have to vote the way that your
Most
personal
people-
feelings are telling you to vote.
So okay.
Okay, so all in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Joe. Let the record show that the motion carries with 5 ayes and 1 nay.
Okay, so how was Craig Bibb affected?
He's not here.
Well,
That's it.
I mean, he wasn't aware that a vote was going to be taken on this.
A vote could be taken at
I
any
mean,
meeting.
he should have been his input. He's on the committee.
Joe, I understand what you're saying, and we read in his opinions, and we all had a chance to take his opinions into account. And had he voted no, the motion still would
It
have
would still
carried.
would have carried, but I mean.
Okay, so
it's,
we have a
you know,
motion.
There's a process that, that to me.
I
that
agree with you.
Wouldn't be the process that should be followed.
There's nothing we can do about it. The vote has carried. We have our allocations. So the question is, with our limited time tonight, and Barbara, how much longer do you have?
I've got to set up for the meeting, so in 10 minutes, I've got to go get stuff out of the closet and
What's the-
set up.
I would say that maybe what we should do is spend those 10 minutes creating for ourselves a framework for what we will do next week in order to continue to make progress.
Well, how much more do we have to give the selectmen?
We have to give them quite a bit. I mean, I know, that Patricia is, you can see from her comments that she's forwarded around her written comments. And I know the rest of you feel this way too, that we should be giving them some direction on what projects we believe should receive some funding in those categories of
Yeah.
infrastructure,
No, but I
municipal,
guess
and KVM.
specific is
Yeah, I mean, I think
quite a job, but I don't.
it's worth saying that the after-school program, senior citizen, the Blueberry Patch, the sewer commission's need for a new roof. I think it's worth saying what we believe is a valuable investment of our ARPA funds. The hybrid meetings at town hall is another thing that we might all agree on.
How about if I put together another spreadsheet with all of these items?
Sorry.
And then a column for each one of us, and people can go through and put a check mark next to the ones that they like. How about that?
That was a good way.
That
of
sounds great.
Categories. I liked that. So that would be great.
But we're not gonna get into the nitty gritty, are we, of how much to give to each?
It sounds like we are.
Well, but only on some roofs, like for the fire department, they submitted a list of items that they want. So I'll break out each one of those items, and you can check off which ones you think are worthy of the funding within that $75,000 category, right? So when we come to the meeting next week, if everybody does this on the spreadsheet, which I'll create, probably not until Friday because I'm not here tomorrow, but that shouldn't take everybody any time at all to go through and check off what you think is a worthy project. I'll put dollar amounts next to each thing. And then when we start next week, we should have some consensus.
Right, and we can do as Ruth suggested. And I mean, if everything rises to the top, then we could say, we're gonna give this amount to this project, this amount, and not worry about fully funding. And we can get into the details of that, next week
Right.
and, talk about whether if we gave $10,000 to a project that was really a $200,000, is that even meaningful? So we can talk about all of that next week, but I think your spreadsheet will be helpful.
And I will also, for the first three categories, put in spending cap $5,000, allocation cap $10,000, so that we all get a sense of what people are comfortable with.
Yes, and I think actually we should discuss that application process, because I think that's an important thing to bring to the select board, to
I
say, to
agree.
be able to say, we think the application should be X and should be open for a month only, and, so that there's some.
Criteria for acceptance.
Yeah, and actually Patricia provided at the last meeting, we had it, and I'm sure I still have it, quite a bit of criteria. I already started a template draft of what the application could be. That application can be utilized. I could tidy it up and we can utilize it for all three categories. It doesn't have to be crazy anything. And then I think Craig might have had some criteria as well. I know his was a little more involved, but I'll look back at my notes and see if I can't tidy up some of that by next week. I need to get this off my plate is what I need to do.
Yeah,
I have
bet.
other things to do.
Yeah.
So this needs to happen and we can't keep.
I like this idea,
Um,
that everything you just said. I mean, at one point, this committee said we need to make this easier for the Board of Selectmen to just make decisions real fast. And I think this is a big help. So being specific, especially on the last three.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely doable to be very specific on the last three, because to reiterate what I said earlier, they're standalone entities.
Yes.
We already know what they want and what they need for the most part.
Could we just quickly get to the survey, how it's
Yes.
going to be posted
Sorry,
before?
thank you. So yes, so new item 6A, making the survey results publicly accessible. We said we would do that. I agree with you, Joe. We should do it.
Well, I had an idea for that, for the, could just like put the link for the survey on the, that page, the Town of Kent webpage, or the Town of Kent, ARPA page.
Could
Just
we
put the
put a
link
link
there.
to the PDF of the results?
We can. The only thing is that the results, there's 3 or 4 different ways that the results can be displayed. And we talked about that very early on.
Right, like first, it's like you get the percentages and you get a pie chart, and then you get, like, I think the comments would be really helpful for
Mhm.
people to be able to see.
Mhm.
But I think that it should be, a link to a PDF that's on that page.
We can do that probably Friday as long as Darlene's here.
And then afterwards, that could be shared onto the, the Town of Kent, the Facebook
Facebook
group
page.
page.
Mhm.
That ought to be enough to distribute it, I would
No,
think.
I'm not on the Facebook. I don't have anything.
I am, I can, I can
but
share
I'm-
it. Yep, I can share it there.
I mean, it might be nice to do it, to share those results in tandem with this idea that we will be making our presentation on May 11th.
It'd be,
Because I think
the
that-
information will be out there ahead of time.
Without saying that, people might wonder, like, okay, I see the results and that's helpful, but now what? And so I think it's a good thing to do in tandem with that announcement that we'll be making our report.
That meeting will be public, that special meeting on May 11th,
They're
either
all public.
virtually public or really public.
They're all public and.
Okay. So we could, people could come to or watch that meeting. And that could also have the link to the survey. Sort of announcement of the meeting.
Right,
So do you want me to get the link to the survey on the town website Friday or no?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, might as well go on the website. If anyone wants to find it beforehand, they can.
That would be on the same page is what the ARPA, in other words, if they click on ARPA committee,
Yeah.
that page will come out and they can find it there.
Again, I don't really deal with the website. Darlene's in charge of it, but I think she can put something so that when you go to the website on the front page, it could say survey results from ARPA committee, and then you could click there. I don't know how long that stays there, but it would probably be there over the weekend, and then something else would come up and push it down so that you can't see it. So
Yeah,
it would be on the
I-
front page, but it would also be on the ARPA page.
I know what you're saying, that page there, they rotate stuff on there, because
They
I've
do.
seen it.
As they post more things, the things go down the ladder and then they drop off.
We could even ask Jean to put it in her e-news.
Because the ARPA page, that's more or less, not permanent, but it's more or less stable than that other site. And I
Well,
think,
the ARPA page is, yes, it doesn't change unless we add something to it. Nothing moves around on that page.
So we'll do all 3 of those, okay?
why not?
Oh, he had so
Okay.
much fun.
All right, so it sounds like we are at the point of being ready to adjourn. Packing up side conversations
Sorry.
sounds like adjournment to me. Is there anything else that anyone would like to say before we adjourn?
Well, how many more meetings will we have before the report?
2.
2 more?
2. It is 5:47 and this meeting is adjourned. We will see you next week. Thank you.